Each year, as specified in the city charter, the mayor must present a State of the City message which reports on where the city's been during the previous year and where it's heading during the next. Part of this requirement is covered by two reports available to you today. A snapshot of the city at the end of 1986, and that's this thick document published or prepared by the City Planning Department. And then we have a document which lists the accomplishments of the city for the past year. It's a very useful compendium of reports prepared by the different departments themselves. The fact that we have these documents gives me the latitude to look a little further back and a little further forward. Aided by slides which have been prepared by graphic staff, I'm going to begin with a brief history of Minneapolis in order to reflect on our historic strengths and to identify what appears to be new and different in the 1980s. I'll end with a 5-year forecast of what we can expect in 1992 if we do an adequate job of responding to today's problems. Perhaps I'm showing my age by reflecting on history. Although I'm aware that the only things that we can count on is change, I also find that the older I get, the more I tend to agree with Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that a page of history is worth a volume of logic. From the beginning, our unique geographic location at the head of the navigable headwaters of the upper Mississippi occasioned our growth. The hydropower of St. Anthony Falls was located between immense pine forests on the upper Mississippi and insatiable markets for cut lumber in the growing cities of the urban frontier downriver. The falls provided the power for the city's first and largest industry up to the turn of the century, sawmilling. After the first settlement of St. Anthony in 1843 and Minneapolis across the river in 1851, the fledgling towns experienced a heady, speculative real estate boom. Growth halted, however, during the devastating National Depression of 1857 and the national convulsion of the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. With the coming of the railroads, the city's fortunes changed. The link to the east opened up populous eastern markets to year-round shipments. The lines to the west and south opened the rich prairie lands to farm settlement. From the frontier farms came the floods of wheat that built the city's second and eventually greatest industry, flour milling. This economic opportunity caused the most rapid growth in our city's history. The two struggling towns facing each other across the river had a combined population of about 10,000 in 1870. By 1890, they had grown to a single city of nearly 165,000 as floods of migrants from Scandinavia and Germany and from eastern cities came to find jobs in the booming urban economy. The flour industry's need for large amounts of short-term credit to buy wheat at harvest time created the basis for our present role as the center for banking and financial services for the Midwest region. The demand for farm machinery and household goods from the farms and small towns of the ever-expanding agricultural frontier made Minneapolis a manufacturing and wholesale center. The present position of the Twin Cities as the financial and distribution center of a multi-state region was solidly forged in the 2 decades after 1870. Such rapid growth almost overwhelmed municipal services and brought Minneapolis the squalor as well as the riches of 19th century industrialism. It also brought the activities and institutions which we associate with a great city. Nicollet Avenue became the retail mecca for the city shoppers and city visitors after 1882. It's not covered that, you'll have noticed. The public library dates from 1886. The city's first public hospital from 1888. The University of Minnesota grew from one building to a whole campus. The city even got its first convention center in 1885 and hosted the National Republican Party Convention in 1892, where Grover Cleveland was nominated. Perhaps the most important initiative to shape the city's future was the creation of the Minneapolis Park Board in 1883. Its far-sighted plans and land acquisition for parks and parkways faced popular opposition, but gave the city a treasured heritage, proving the value of planning for the benefit of future generations. Another severe national depression in 1893 slowed the city's growth until the turn of the century. With recovery came new directions for the city's economy. The lumber industry peaked in 1901, then rapidly declined as loggers exhausted the resources of the state's forests. In 1919, the last big sawmill closed. Flour milling reached its peak in 1916, then gradually slackened as the effect of soil exhaustion throughout the upper Midwest and transportation costs made Buffalo and Kansas City more attractive to millers. But Minneapolis continued to attract thousands of residents each year. Its job base expanded steadily from its growth as a financial and service center and from steady diversification of business and industry. The corporations and capital that built early Minneapolis remained, finding new outlets for energy and investment in what, by 1930, was a city of 464,000 at the center of a metropolitan area now beyond the city's boundaries. The Fauché Tower was the tallest of the downtown buildings that symbolized the city's role as the economic capital for the region. Fantasies about the city's glorious future were encompassed in the City Beautiful Plan, designed by Edward Bennett and Daniel Burnham in 1917. It influenced some of the classic structures still with us, but the plan's ambitions outstripped public interest, particularly when the First World War redirected civic energies. In 1920, the City Planning Commission was formed. In the business-oriented, laissez-faire climate of the 1920s, however, city government gave planning little attention once the zoning ordinance had been enacted in 1924. Planning was only one of many municipal functions that received little support in an era when private prosperity alone was supposed to be sufficient to assure a rosy future. The city neglected its infrastructure and kept its services minimal, exacerbating the differences between residents who lived in either squalor or prosperity. Then came the Great Depression. Although the city's diversified economic base shielded it from some of the worst effects of the Depression, Minneapolis shared the national problems of unemployment, business failures, closed factories, and disinvestment through the 1930s. Soup lines, homeless persons, shanty towns, and conflict between business and labor were only the most visible signs of economic distress. The city was no longer a place of opportunity. The Depression soon overwhelmed the city's traditional methods used by charitable organizations for helping those in need. The national response to the Depression, expressed through Roosevelt's New Deal, brought the federal government into the local scene, not only with Social Security and other health and welfare programs, but also with public works and public housing. The Sumner Olsen housing project was begun. What little new construction occurred was usually sponsored by the Public Works Administration. Private investment downtown often took the form of demolishing old buildings for parking lots. Rearmament for the Second World War through to 1945 brought an end to the Depression, but did little else to help a city that showed increasing signs of age and decay. Diversion of capital and energy to the war effort meant continued failure to replace obsolete structures and facilities, both public and private. New residents attracted by the city's wartime job opportunities caused the worst housing shortage since the 1880s. The population peaked in 1950 at 522,000, when growing families were crowded into approximately the same number of housing units as we have now with 362,000 people. In Minneapolis, after 1950, the number of residents began to decline. Freeway construction radically altered the cityscape and swept away several thousand structures, while new apartment buildings added units and increased inner-city densities. Families with children sought new homes in the city's fringe neighborhoods or suburbs. Older families shrank in size as their children left home, and single young adults flocked to the city from the upper Midwest region. At the same time, the city's population of poor people increased. Barred from suburban housing by lack of income or discrimination and forced to accept the oldest deteriorating housing in the central city, the poor could neither afford the costs of home ownership nor escape exploitation by owners of slum rentals. They tended to be handicapped or unskilled workers or senior citizens. The city's economic health also began to slip. Industries found the aging multi-story factory buildings of the central city no longer suited to their needs. Only vacant suburban sites could provide the cheap space needed for the single-story, land-extensive facilities that new manufacturing and storage techniques and demand for parking spaces required. Poor public transportation to suburban plants resulted in lost job opportunities for city residents, most in need of jobs. The reduced purchasing power of central city residents combined with the growing suburban affluence pulled retail business out of the city as well. Mobility in a society dependent upon the automobile led to the creation of shopping malls. The Southdale Shopping Center, opened in 1956, was only the first of several suburban shopping malls that cut most severely into the trade of neighborhood shopping areas and also threatened the health of downtown retailing. The decision made by General Mills in this same year to move its corporate headquarters to a suburban site boded ill for the future of downtown offices. But 1956 was also the pivotal year when Minneapolis leaders began to reverse the trend toward urban decay, which would destroy other central cities in the nation during the 1960s. The public-private partnerships for which we've gained a national reputation began to form to counter obsolescence. Before 1956, the city planning department was staffed by only one professional. Concern over downtown decline, the effect of a state freeway plan on neighborhoods, and an obsolete zoning ordinance led to a 1956 Barton-Ashman study that recommended a much expanded planning department with a director willing to get involved in the political decision-making process. The city accepted the study's recommendations and hired Larry Irvin from Columbus, Ohio, to head the expanded department. Another 1956 initiative which created the turning point for Minneapolis was the formation of the Downtown Council. Working with the council, the planning department drafted the first downtown plan by 1959. It set out the principles which are still guiding development in the Metro 2000 plan: a compact core, offices clustered close to retail development, a pedestrian mall on Nicollet Avenue, parking ramps around the periphery of the core to intercept employee parkers as they came off freeways, and all-weather pedestrian links on skyways from parking ramps to the core. The Downtown Council began work on the skyways and Nicollet Mall elements of the redevelopment plan in the early 60s. Complete rezoning was also undertaken in the late 50s with heavy neighborhood involvement. Adoption of the new code in 1962 made Minneapolis one of only 3 large central cities in the nation to modernize its zoning code in the post-war period based on what was then an advanced concept of permitted as opposed to excluded uses and performance-based standards for industry. In 1959, the City Planning Commission adopted a map of neighborhoods and communities that became the basis for planning and neighborhood reorganization efforts. Many residents became conscious for the first time of their neighborhood's identity. Organized around neighborhood schools, the neighborhoods of today are essentially as mapped in 1959. Often most active when angry about decisions made by government or private developers, neighborhood organizations have waxed and waned over the last 25 years, but have always strengthened our sense of community. In 1956, in addition to assuring effective planning, the city set up the Capital Long-Range Improvement Committee, CLIC, to remove capital funding decisions from the political arena and to set priorities for the maintenance of the city's infrastructure. From CLIC's work proceeded systematic programs over the years to replace fire stations, improve sewer and water systems, pave residential streets, separate sanitary and storm sewers, and provide public improvements in renewal areas. Minneapolis made far more infrastructure replacements than most older cities, and at that same time achieved and maintained a AAA bond rating. Federal funds have been artfully captured for a multitude of programs beginning with the urban renewal programs of the 50s and continuing with the War on Poverty and the Great Society programs of the 60s and the HUD-sponsored community development programs of the 70s and 80s. Results of federal urban renewal programs were mixed. For example, the total clearance required in early urban renewal projects cleared out Skid Row in the Gateway project, but also demolished the Metropolitan Building. The loss of that wonderful building spurred the historic preservation movement. In another example, concentration of public housing in the Glenwood, Glendale, and Grant areas ended up having disastrous consequences for desegregation planning in the Minneapolis schools. Other federal programs missed the mark prescribed by Congress. The Pilot City program for the North Side, for example, got local agencies together in the Pilot City Center, but failed to achieve its intended goal of interagency cooperation at the federal level. The Model Cities program on the South Side did create social service agencies and foster citizen advocacy, but did little to affect its stated goal of physical rehabilitation. The New Communities program in Cedar Riverside required an unrealistic level of housing density and stopped short after construction of Cedar Square West as the neighborhood rose up in revolt against the project. Stringent regulations accompanying short-term federal dollars often diverted comprehensive local planning. Finally, in 1974, the federal government began the Community Development Block Grant Program, which accommodated locally defined needs. Just as neighborhood organizations had been stimulated by the 1965 program requirement for maximum feasible participation of people affected, so was neighborhood organization fostered by CDBG requirements in the 70s. From 1974 through 1978, town meetings were held in planning districts to elect representatives to a citywide advisory committee. A few of today's city council members became politically active as members of that committee. Through to 1982, planning district citizen advisory committees, PDCACs, aided by community planners employed by the city planning department, worked on comprehensive plans for neighborhood revitalization on the plan for the 80s. In targeted central city neighborhoods, federal funds were also focused on neighborhood strategy areas, NSAs. As the federal dollars dwindled and relations deteriorated between the council and the political leadership generated by the PDCACs, support for those umbrella community organizations was eliminated. Since 1984, however, some of our limited CDBG dollars have been channeled through the MCDA to support the work of neighborhood groups umbrella organizations such as the Neighborhood Priorities Coalition and the Neighborhood Consortium of Nonprofit Developers have helped maintain support for neighborhood revitalization. Corporate support has also been important to the revitalization of central city neighborhoods, as well as to the continuing growth of downtown. Examples include a loan to acquire facilities for the Pilot City Health Center, Honeywell's support of housing rehabilitation and job creation in the Phillips neighborhood, Dayton Hudson's support for planning for the Whittier neighborhood, equity provided by the Downtown Council to promote the rehabilitation of Elliott Park, General Mills' participation in the Stevens Square project, and the formation of the Greater Minneapolis Metropolitan Housing Corporation, GMIC, to coordinate private efforts in the housing area. Public-private partnerships are responsible for the creative financing which has been a hallmark for this city's approach to assuring housing and commercial development. As probably the best example, the City Council secured state legislation permitting tax increment financing in 1970. Although the first tax increment projects in Loring Park and Nicollet Lake began slowly, as the 1973 recession dried up investment capital just as land was cleared, the application of tax increment financing has taken off since 1980. There are now 44 tax increment district projects whose assessed value has increased after fiscal disparities by over $338 million, thanks to private investment supported by public assistance. Outstanding examples of tax increment development include industrial parks such as North Washington, the now completed Loring Park housing area, commercial revitalization on West Broadway, City Center, the uptown development at Hennepin and Lake, Center Village, River Place and St. Anthony, Maine, the American Indian Business Development Corporation's projects on Franklin Avenue, International Market Square, and riverfront development in Industry Square. Since the Minneapolis Community Development Agency was formed in 1981, combining all of the development functions previously located in the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, the City Coordinator's Office, and the Industrial Development Corporation, More approaches to creative financing have been developed, providing the city with its own bank to aid high-priority redevelopment. These tools for generating local dollars are essential if the city is to remain competitive with suburban locations for residents or businesses. Just as the city has been creative in redevelopment finance, so it has been superb in its budget making during the last decade. In 1978, Mayor Hofstede instituted a process for planning long-range capital improvements and the annual operating budget, a process which is outstanding in the nation, as recognized by the United States Conference of Mayors' first Financial Leadership Award presented to Minneapolis this month. Through that budget process, we have maintained a stable mill levy and climbed back down the ladder from first to 21st among metropolitan area municipalities for our property tax burden. As important, we've managed to maintain an increasingly rare AAA municipal bond rating. To summarize this brief history, Minneapolis has survived and prospered through recessions and depressions and wars and immigrations and outmigrations and the urban crisis. We are still the upper Midwest center for financial and business services and for retailing. In spite of intense international competition in all fields, the private sector continues to expand job opportunities. Befitting our origins, we are turning the face of the city back to the river. We are steadily adding magnetic attractions for tourism and the arts. And the city has artfully leveraged its resources to rebuild neighborhoods, maintain the infrastructure, and provide traditional services within increasingly tight budgets. Now, however, we face another watershed year similar to 1956. There's no longer the growth in our tax base to match our fiscal needs, so that we must raise the mill levy in 1988. No amount of creative financing can really compensate for the cutbacks in federal dollars for affordable housing or central city revitalization. Most important, central city poverty is growing too much and too fast, endangering our human resource potential and neighborhood livability. Now there are two cities in Minneapolis. One is comprised primarily of middle-class adults who are workers or retired seniors. There's another city in Minneapolis comprised primarily of families headed by single parents who are employed in low-wage jobs or unemployed and dependent upon welfare assistance. The social and economic distance is increasing between the adults either filling career jobs with expanding fringe benefits or benefiting from substantial retirement income, and the children who face increasing barriers to social and economic independence as they grow into adulthood. The barriers fostering dependency include personal barriers such as early childbearing, divorce, lack of nurturing, low self-esteem, drug and alcohol abuse, poor education, poor health and nutrition. Community service barriers such as the lack of affordable, reliable child care, lack of medical benefits, lack of affordable housing, disincentives created by public assistance, lack of transportation to where the jobs are, and labor market barriers created by the job supply, the lack of job skills which match employers' hiring criteria, lack of fringe benefits, and racial discrimination. Impediments which begin during childhood and adolescence are having a profound influence on the lives of future generations in what is called the welfare cycle. Other family members, neighborhoods, and schools also suffer the consequences of chronic unemployment and welfare dependency. The larger community is affected through pressures on government budgets, charitable resources, human service agencies, and other local institutions stretching to support at-risk families. The Minneapolis economy has always been vulnerable to swings in the national and international economy. Poverty has always been with us. In contrast to the past, however, some current conditions reduce hope for the future of our persistent poor and therefore for our community. On the one hand, long-term dependency on our welfare system has isolated children in single-parent families from a support system which can provide access to hope for the future. On the other hand, changes in the economy have reduced hope for access to good-paying jobs, which will provide adequate support for family self-sufficiency. The present composition of our population also creates special concern about the impact of growing poverty on our neighborhoods. The baby boom generation of young adults who moved into the city through the late 60s and 70s is moving into middle age, raising families and making decisions about where to live. There are far fewer young adults to take their place in the neighborhoods or the workforce. By the early 90s, all of the businesses which seek either professional, technical, or service workers will face a major shortage in entry-level workers, and middle-income neighborhoods which seek new residents to fill housing vacancies will find few takers. We face an impending crisis. We cannot afford to waste the human resource potential of males who are out of the workforce, mothers who want to work but are hedged in by lack of adequate child care, unskilled youth, or school dropouts. Our businesses need workers. Our neighborhoods need stable families with the income to buy and maintain homes. We must mount a massive, concentrated effort to invest in the children growing up in the city. Their future is our future. Almost every major city problem which I can identify is tied back to the problem that many of our children are not growing up to be healthy, well-educated citizens. When you think about crime, unemployment, teen pregnancy, drugs, school dropouts, all of these problems stem from inadequate youth development. Dramatic changes in the family structure have been occurring during the last couple of decades, and the important responsibility of child rearing has been devalued along the way. The first 20 years of life are not years to be gotten through in front of a TV set. They should be explored richly with steady growth through nurturing as an important part of the total continuum of life. Regardless of family circumstances, every parent, and that includes fathers as well as mothers, should be required to deliver a school-ready child at age 5 and to participate in the education of that child from the kindergarten through the 12th grade. Looking at the long-term interests of the city, which of these expenditures do you think is most cost-effective? A $10,000 grant to a homeowner to fix up the electrical and plumbing code violations, or a $10,000 contribution enabling 4 disadvantaged children to participate in a program such as Project Head Start, which has demonstrated that half as many children will become pregnant while in high school or will drop out of high school compared to those at-risk youngsters who do not participate in Head Start. If I could, I would choose the latter. We've seen in our historic review that redevelopment programs focused on physical rehabilitation. Consider for a moment the contrast between the construction of a house and the growth of a child. Once a building permit has been issued, the city sends out an inspector to examine every system within the dwelling before permitting occupancy. For those who live in the house, on the other hand, we have a laissez-faire attitude which says that anything is okay so long as you don't get caught breaking the law. Help is provided through a non-system of agencies which must be sought out by the parent. There are no defined community standards for parenting except for extreme problems of abuse or abandonment. Now, we thought it was wise in the 60s to shift the city's role in education to an independent school district and the fiscal burden for human services to the county. As these separate agencies have taken on the responsibility for human services, however, different aspects of human development have been treated through categorical programs, but nowhere has the full continuum of human development needs been addressed. In the meantime, the city has faced 3 decades of growth in poverty. We all want a healthy community with healthy people living in healthy neighborhoods capable of participating in a healthy job market. This community has got to organize itself to be able to coordinate human development as well as housing and economic development and transportation and job training and traditional city services in order to fulfill those healthy objectives. The city council members know what I'm hooked on. I want to make sure that every at-risk child is tracked from the time of a mother's pregnancy so that adequate nurturing will occur with parenting education, nutrition, and early childhood development. I want every Minneapolis adult to make time for tutoring or mentoring a disadvantaged child. I want the business community to guarantee work experience for every high school student and graduate. Through the new Interagency Youth Coordinating Board, I have found out that the best way to think about human development is through a systems approach, looking at the continuum from birth to adulthood. I know what the city council members are hooked on. They are afraid that the economic strength essential to the quality of life will be eroded as middle-class families decide to move to the suburbs, abandoning the central city to the social and physical deterioration which accompanies growing poverty. Council members are correctly addressing their fears through a process of strategic planning which began last spring. One result is the commitment to assure coordination of all city services within each neighborhood through a neighborhood coordinating team. Another is to dramatically increase police and crime prevention activities through what is termed the SAFE program. Meetings are now being held in the neighborhoods to inform residents about these initiatives and to shape their practical application with citizen input. Both the council members and I are feeling frustrated, however. We know what we want, but somehow we can't make it happen. Some major obstacles stand in the way of fulfilling this community's potential. Government bureaucracies themselves provide a major obstacle. When Jan Smaby left her job as Director of Economic Assistance for the county, she said that 95% of staff time was spent on paperwork rather than on people. While we press for comprehensive human service planning, which will focus on case management for families and individuals working their way to economic self-sufficiency, I have the feeling that managers of state and county programs responsible for income support, food stamps, child care, health care, jobs programs, and education have no vehicles to even talk to each other. No matter how interested in their children and their clients, they're consumed by red tape. State and federal deficits make it abundantly clear there will be few new human service dollars to combat inner-city poverty. Even so, the governor could right now make an enormous difference by demanding that waivers be granted to allow families in need to come to a community-based family advocate who would be responsible for not only providing welfare assistance, but also development of individualized self-sufficiency plans and referral to support systems, which could make self-sufficiency come true. Sabathani on the south side and Pilot City on the north side are perfect locations for this kind of coordinated delivery of services. Within the city, we can do a much better job of looking at human development systems rather than isolated services. This means we must have the audacity to look beyond the limits of services funded exclusively by city government, setting up collaborative mechanisms involving other public or private agencies, insisting that problems be dealt with in a comprehensive, cooperative manner. Let me give you some examples. Now we fund neighborhood organizations through the MCDA to plan housing and economic development. We should be funding these organizations to take on the full range of resident needs as outreach for a neighborhood needs assessment, as recruiters for tutors and mentors for disadvantaged youth, as outreach for the neighborhood coordination team and the SAFE program, as planners for coordinated child care. Funding for comprehensive neighborhood planning must be provided because neighborhood organizations provide the infrastructure for community development. We need to involve neighborhood organizations in a major effort to develop a plan for the 90s. We've developed a few good models for getting over the obstacle created by separate governmental jurisdictions. The Youth Coordinating Board is one example. Another is the new Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. But the barriers between the City Council and School Board, or the City Council and the Park Board, are just as bad or worse as between the City Council and the County Commissioners. We cannot survive without the common understanding that all of us elected officials report to the same clients. Neither the schools, nor the parks, nor the city agencies belong to the elected officials or administrators. They belong to all of the people in Minneapolis. Bureaucratic jealousy is the worst venom. In this weak mayor, weak council, weak everybody form of government, in which everyone has to stroke everybody before consensus is reached, too much energy and time and taxpayers' money is wasted in the process of achieving consensus. Just as we need better intergovernmental planning, we need to attend to our own internal organization. The experience of the last few years has shown both significant progress in improving the management of the city and continuing weaknesses. These weaknesses revolve around the central question of who's in charge. This question comes up frequently because of lack of clarity about who's in charge of particular projects, multiple referrals to council committees which require excessive staff time and delay resolution of issues, multiple and sometimes conflicting directions to staff from various elected officials, and intervention by individual officials in staff performance of assigned responsibilities. The council should act as a board of directors, setting goals, defining policies, setting priorities, and monitoring follow-up. Instead, the council has 11 committees so that each majority caucus member can chair a committee. Now served by at least one aide and secretary to take care of constituent calls, every full-time council member feels that he or she must be responsible for the departments or offices reporting to his or her committee. This ends up with every council committee feeling responsible for every nitty-gritty detail of staff activity. The council now has 11 managers, each of whom leads a committee which acts as a commission responsible for department management. What does this do to professional staff who are called upon directly by council members regardless of the staff status within a department? I believe that it reduces their efforts as managers and risk takers and leads them to hide and shift direction frequently. It's unhealthy. What do we do about this problem of everyone running everything? There are three ways in which these questions can be addressed. Through a change in the charter which currently fails to distinguish between legislative and executive functions, through changes in the committee structure, and through changes in organizations of the departments and their reporting requirements. Consideration of charter change would undoubtedly lead to consideration of various proposals which would alter the size of the council. Among these possibilities are, first, a strong mayor system under which the mayor appoints all department heads subject to council approval, and the responsibility for the city is divided, with the council having legislative authority and the mayor the executive authority. This proposal has been considered by the voters on a number of occasions since World War II and has failed each time. Second, a 9-person council with the mayor chairing. 3 of the council members could be elected at large, the rest by wards. The executive committee could be made up of at-large members plus the mayor. The department heads would be appointed by the executive committee as now. Or, third, a 13-person council with 4 elected at large, otherwise arranged as above. Or fourth, a 26-person council with council members being part-time. They could elect 3 or 4 members to the executive committee who would serve full-time. On the question of the internal organization of the council, the following options might be considered. Reduce the number of committees to 5 or 6. Or restrict the work of committees to policy and oversight, not management. Or simplify the process by allowing one committee to dispose of an issue without referral to other committees. Or require the executive committee to meet more frequently to provide follow-up on implementation of policy and on management issues. A review of departmental organization suggests a couple of changes which might be considered. First, assign only staff functions to the coordinator. Staff functions are defined as those serving all the other departments. Then consolidate departments so there are fewer under which all operating activities are conducted. A second alternative or choice is to assign the coordinator to monitor and coordinate the city's total work program. How can these issues get raised, studied, and decided? Again, there are a number of alternative approaches. First, ask the Charter Commission to look at the structural issues. Second, hire an outside consultant to review the city's organization and make recommendations. Third, create a citizens group to study city management and structure using people skilled in management and also people knowledgeable about City Hall. It would be important to get people who are not otherwise directly involved in City Hall decisions. Fourth, create an in-house task force to look at relationships between departments and elected officials and develop recommendations. Or fifth, ask the City Council Rules Committee to take up the issue so that some of the problems can be addressed through the council rules. I recommend that these subjects be placed on our agenda for 1987, so we might begin now the process of improving the capacity of city government to more effectively deal with the problems of our community. Members of the council have already begun discussion of some organizational issues through the Majority Caucus and through the Ways and Means Committee, which has taken the lead in this work plan for 1987. This year we are celebrating the bicentennial of the United States Constitution. Through its framework, we have all pledged allegiance to the goals of justice for all, the pursuit of happiness, and the general welfare of our citizens. Now, however, the world is our community. Accountability is vast. Let us be accountable, nevertheless, for the pursuit of justice and happiness of our own Minneapolis citizens. Thanks to the stability of our Constitution, we have both memory and hope. Both are needed in the days to come. Based upon my belief in the ability of this community to rally against all odds, I'd like to present a forecast for 1992, playing out some of the trends which are clear from our past. This forecast is created from current plans and demographic projections, spiced with a little bit of optimism. The initiatives needed now to make this forecast a reality make up a part of our agenda for 1987. If we respond adequately to today's problems, we can have hope for tomorrow. In 1992, the population has dropped just below 350,000. The baby boom population is middle-aged while the number of seniors has declined steadily, as has the number of younger adults ages 20 to 34. Family households have increased, whereas non-family households have fallen off, resulting in a higher level of vacancies, inefficiency in one-bedroom apartments, and in demolition of older apartment buildings which provide this kind of housing stock. Aside from continuing growth of riverfront housing, focusing on the historical amenity of St. Anthony Falls, which created the city, no housing starts are occurring. Higher turnover of homes in the fringe areas of Camden, Nokomis, and Northeast continue as senior homeowners die. The amount of downtown office space of all types has increased to 25 million square feet compared to 19.5 million in 1986. 140,000 workers are now employed downtown, now in 1992, including many more service workers in low-paying jobs dependent upon the growing success of the city's hospitality industry. Trade along the new Nicollet Mall is excellent, supported primarily by downtown workers and tourists. The entertainment center on Hennepin Avenue attracts families to a variety of indoor and outdoor activities supported by the Hennepin Avenue Theater Association and backed by the basketball and hockey arena, and old warehouses lively with art studios and galleries. The Technology Corridor is an attractive, well-landscaped area between the University of Minnesota and downtown. Some of its research and development enterprise is hidden from view in mined underground space. Media and graphics industries are filling in the space between the Technology Corridor and downtown, providing the skyway connectors which link downtown to the Metrodome. The various new buildings in the city are diverse in style, yet attractive, assisted by a non-binding design review process. Rapid transit links the two downtowns of Minneapolis and St. Paul, as well as the airport and downtown. Although the two cities still have separate governments, many of their business and cultural organizations are now unified. Plans are finally being developed for a second major airport south of the Twin Cities. Quieter aircraft engines have reduced airport noise, but increased airport operations make noise more continuous. With a decrease in supply of entry-level workers, more of the hard-to-employ have found employment. The number of hard-to-employ will begin to decrease as early childhood programs reach at-risk children in time to prepare them for K-12 schooling. Although many workers are part-time, they receive prorated fringe benefits. Child care available on a sliding fee basis dependent on income allows parents to take service jobs. The business community has also moved to cafeteria benefit plans and offers flex time to parents. Many residents and workers in Minneapolis volunteer time as mentors for at-risk youth. Work internships are available for all youth who stay in school, and teen pregnancy is dramatically reduced. Neighborhood organizations provide effective outreach for coordinated city-county services and themselves operate community-based business enterprises to provide neighborhood services. The public housing projects on the north side are filled increasingly by families who will stay only long enough to acquire or improve job skills at the expanded Family Learning Center, now affiliated with the TCOIC. As they find jobs, they move on to permanent housing. The Glendale housing project in southeast Minneapolis is a national model for tenant management. The city has learned that physical and economic and social revitalization go hand in hand. It must involve those who are affected by the programs and proceeds best through steady increments of progress rather than through giant steps. The government helps the private sector to shape visions through a coherent planning process, provides incentives, coordinates follow-up, and provides the infrastructure for development, but recognizes that continued revitalization depends on private investment. In 1992, Minneapolis is an exciting people place with a diverse cosmopolitan population and sophisticated, varied cultural choices. It's tied through quick and easy access in all but rush hours to a Twin Cities society and economy making use of all that's in St. Paul as well as in Minneapolis. In 1992, Minneapolis will be a great city within the Twin Cities, within the upper Midwest, within the world. Most important, all of the people in the community will be able to share in its amenities. I'd like to express my thanks to Dick Heath and the Planning Department and the Graphics Department for their work on this history and forecast. Now, outlined in the forecast were plans already being pursued with the private sector and other public agencies, as well as other plans so far only on the drawing boards. I ask each and every one of you to help me verify the forecast of 1992. Walt Rostow says that we're entering a new political era, one in which America will be preoccupied by increased economic competition from abroad and will need better cooperation at home to deal with this challenge. To help the city to be competitive in the changing international environment, I strongly support council efforts to establish an international trade task force. This group would make sure that government is coordinating and cooperating with business to support our competitive standing. We in City Hall recognize that we need more and better cooperation among our elected officials and public agency heads and businesses and city residents to meet the challenge for cooperation. Based on our history of cooperation in Minneapolis, I believe that we have an excellent chance of making our way through the world of the 1990s with a community-wide sense of common commitment and destiny. Thank you, each of you, for taking an important part in our common effort.